Okay, so we are doing another game series retrospective, this time Metal Gear Solid, because they're really good games, and though most people are very well aware of what goes on in the main series of games, if you're into games at all, there's a couple spin-offs I want to talk about, and also some early titles in the series that no one ever seems to talk about, so let's do this! But I do want to make clear that I'm not going to be giving Kojima all the credit here in this video. I was very careful not to just give Koji Igarashi all the credit in the last video, and even though Kojima is definitely an auteur who's a strong guiding hand on most of these games, he's not the only person working on him. He has co-writers who shift in and out, and you can kind of tell. He's got artists. He's got really talented programmers, He himself is not much of a computer guy. That's other people. And I'm not going to give him all the credit. I will only briefly mention him when I feel like it's really relevant to the specific game we're on. But it is definitely his franchise. No one can take that away from him. So to take it all the way back, Metal Gear, not Metal Gear Solid, Metal Gear started as an MSX title in the late 80s, and it is arguably the first stealth game ever made. Because the MSX was a gaming computer thing, we didn't really have that in the United States, and it wasn't really good at rendering lots of moving sprites or, fast shifting screens. That just wasn't what it was good at. So Kojima was like, I'm gonna make it a stealth game and it'll be like all those 80s action spy movies I like. Go. And that worked out pretty well. Going back to this one, it's definitely neat to see all the elements of stealth gameplay that would come to define all stealth games, like making noise to distract guards, dashing around behind them, neck snapping, all that fun stuff. But it's also just a really, really old game. The guard's vision cone is just a straight line. They might as well be like a laser tripwire. You can do a little jig right next to them and they see nothing. This game also lacks the storiness that would come to define the Metal Gear franchise. It has the radio, people call you on it, but that's just to give you directions as to what to do next and to maybe give you a hint if you get a little stuck. Definitely an appreciated feature, because this game is a little obtuse at times. It's got a lot of those old puzzles, which is just punch every wall in the basement until you find the one that sounds a little different, and then I hope you still have C4. There's a bunch of key cards you need to open doors, and the menu system just isn't built for you to be swapping in and out of these a lot, but the doors want you to, and the doors are not laid out in a reasonable sense. Like, the level 5 key will open a door, and then on the other side you'll find a level 1 door, and the level 5 key doesn't work on the level 1 door, you gotta pull out the level 1 key. It's silly and tedious, don't like that. And the story is, like I said earlier, really simple. You go to a base full of anime terrorists and you try and stop their walking tank robot, which can fire nukes, and I don't know why you'd need a tank that can fire nukes. That doesn't seem super practical. I get the practicality of having a mech robot. I get that. But why does it need to fire nukes? Aren't your main threats as a tank dudes with rocket launchers? And there's this guy on the radio, his name is Big Boss, and he's calling you up and giving you directions, and then whoa! Turns out he was the villain the whole time! Big surprise. And the original plan was for them to send in Snake, who's a new guy from Foxhound, and for him to get his ass kicked for plausible deniability reasons, but he turned out to be a supernatural ultra kick-butt soldier. There's just not a lot to say about this one. It is neat to go back to as sort of a historical perspective, but as a game to play, dated as hell, I don't recommend it. Of course, the MSX version isn't what most people in the English-speaking world played. They played the NES port, which It tried, okay? It tried to squeeze the levels and the stealthy gameplay onto the NES, and it did not do it right. The level design is just bad and aimless, and there's a lot more bullshit. It's kind of a broken game. It sold really well though. So Konami put out a sequel called Metal Gear 2 Snake's Revenge. Kojima wasn't involved with this one, and by all accounts, it's really bad. Like, even for a action-y NES game, like, it's a very bad game. But Kojima heard about it getting made, he was off doing other things, and he's like, what? I wasn't involved in the sequel to my own damn thing? I'm gonna go make my own sequel! Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake is an astonishingly good game. Like, okay, yes, it's very old. It's got a lot of the same issues as the first Metal Gear game, although it does have a lot of improvements, but as like a cinematic experience on an 8-bit-ish console in like 1990, this is an astonishing game. This opening sequence with like all these like cool camera angles, zoom-in schematics of the Metal Gear robot being made, and the music is really kick-ass. It's like, and then Snake crawls up over the mountain with this music playing in the background and he calls home to the base. It's really good at setting a tone. Like, it really establishes what you're doing here rather than just being soldier who shows up at base, go. The codec is greatly expanded. There's a lot more people to call. I didn't even find one of them. Like, there's this guy you're supposed to call to get info on the bosses, and I just never called him until he called me right at the end of the game to give me a little bit of exposition. And, you know, the Colonel Campbell is there, yeah, from Metal Gear Solid. And there's Natasha, a figure skater who's a spy around the base, and you, like, track her down by, like, her going into the women's bathroom, which is a little odd because all the soldiers are supposed to be men on this base. I feel like that was a bit of an oversight on her part. There's Holly, who was part of another unit sent in earlier. She's got a lot of advice on the base, and the stealth is greatly improved. First of all, the guards have actual vision cones now. It's a little hard to tell what they can see, but in front of them and sort of to the sides, so I guess it's kind of an actual vision cone now. And what's really crazy is they've got the Soliton radar up in the corner, and it shows like 9 squares around you, and the guards will leave the screen you're on and continue their guard path through other screens. In fact, it's screens that aren't even on the radar. I don't know how the game is keeping track of this. Like, they're not being rendered, but they're being kept track of. This is technical wizardry for the time period. Now there's a crawl button, which allows you to, crawl under desks and hide from stuff. You've still got your cigarettes for seeing IR sensors. Yeah, that was in the first game. Those are never going anywhere. And there's just a really good beat stealth segment, action set piece, stealth segment, action set piece. Bosses are really fun in this game. There were bosses in the first game. They're just like, haha, I have gun, bam, bam. He's like, that's not an interesting boss. But then there's this guy in Metal Gear 2 who's called the Running Man, and his whole thing is he's just gonna run away from you in these 4 rooms while there's like poison gas being pumped in, and you gotta go get yourself some mines to trick him into running into them. But it was so cute when he like showed you his running path on the radar, and he comes back and he's like, really impressive, right? It's like, yeah, really impressive. You're breathing a little hard there, mate. You okay? So I was just really impressed by all the different things this game does. Like, there's a bunch of weapons for you to track down. It's like a big Metroidvania map that you stealth around in. The game actually tracks how many guards you kill at the end and gives you a ranking on that. So, like, I guess it's possible to get through this without alerting anyone, and maybe I can kind of, like, mentally see how it would be done. And there's, like, actual cutscenes over the course of the game. Yes, it's just, like, 2... sprites sitting in an alley having a conversation, but God, that's a lot for this time period. Like, these are real characters that I care about, and it's just a really fun game. I was blown away by how good it was, even like with a lot of the older annoyances. Like, you're gonna need to pull up a walkthrough because there's some puzzles that require the manual, which of course you don't have, because the people are gonna change their codec frequency on you. It's like, check the manual for what I'm changing it to, and there is a cool another puzzle involving the manual though, where it's like tap codes on a wall that you have to decipher using a little grid. I recommend you just look up what that grid is rather than looking up the answer because it's kind of fun to solve that. And there's a guy who's been bugging you on the radio, and it turns out he's Gray Fox from the first game, who was literally just a guy in a room who had a little bit of info for you before he just vanished from the game world entirely. Now he's back and is like mad at you for blowing up the base in the first game. And he's loyal to Big Boss, who's the bad guy again. Somehow he's not dead. And the final boss with him actually is a really appropriate boss for this kind of game, which was mostly about, running around a base, finding key cards to unlock doors and collect items to progress. That's most of the game. It's a puzzle game that you stealth around, and for this boss fight, you're dropped into a room with a bunch of doors and key cards that you have to grab and open so you can jury-rig a flamethrower to take on this big bad guy. I don't know, it was really fun. If you can track this down, and I'm going to tell you how to do that later, I really recommend this game for some classic 2D stealthing adventures. But this one wasn't released in the United States for years, and it isn't the one that made the franchise famous.
They're demanding that the government turn over the remains of Big Boss, and they say that if their demands are not met within 24 hours, they'll launch a nuclear weapon. You'll have 2 mission objectives.
Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation is where most people started their adventures with Solid Snake. And yes, it does actually recognize the canon of the last 2 Metal Gear games. Kind of, it retcons them already. This series is just like that. What drives this game, I think, to the great heights that it did sales-wise is it is genuinely a really cinematic game. Nowadays, saying a game is cinematic can be a bit of a dig because the game is focusing too much on its fancy visuals and not enough on the actual play experience. Well, one, that's not actually a problem with Metal Gear Solid. And for the late 90s, this is just genuinely jaw-droppingly good cinematic cutscenes. It's all in engine, and they've got proper camera angles and the voice acting. That's what makes this game. That is what makes and breaks this game. Everything is voiced. Everything. That's why the game's on 2 CDs. It wasn't because the levels were so freaking huge they couldn't fit it in there. No, they had so much dialogue that it spilled over onto a second disc, and CDs were designed to hold audio. They overloaded it. But that voice acting was so worth it. Okay, so now we've got the codec again. The codec was in the last game, but it was just text. Now, it's all properly voice acted, and the voice actors are killing it. Voice acting for over a decade would not be this good usually. Hell, there are games coming out now that don't even bother to pay their voice actors to give this much of a shit. Solid Snake, voiced by David Hayter, is absolutely delightful. He's got the gruff smoker's voice, but he's also playful and charming, but not totally a James Bond pastiche, even though that's absolutely what they're going for. Meryl, Otacon, all these characters are great. The villains, okay, so I said nice things about the boss fights in the last game. The boss fights in this game are goddamn bloody amazing. Maybe not necessarily to play, but what's great about this one is that all the bosses you're gonna fight are, one, set up in that opening cutscene where you get launched out of a submarine where Colonel Campbell is listing them off to who you're gonna have to look out for. But also you run into them in the course of the game. You run into a Revolver Ocelot early on for a quick boss fight, but then he's back later to torture you. You run into Vulcan Raven early on in the tank battle, and after you beat him there, he's like, oh, we are going to have a great fight in the future. My mystical forehead crow knows it. You run into Sniper Wolf early on, and she takes out Meryl, and then you have to try and counter snipe her. And then when you win that, turns out she's not dead. She comes back for another fight. All these bosses are just great. Oh, Psycho Mantis. I actually don't have a lot to add here. Psycho Mantis is one of the most talked about boss fights ever because of all the fourth wall fuckery that goes on. It's a good fight. It's a little oversold how obvious it was that you needed to switch controller ports. You're not going to figure it out, and after 2 minutes, the colonel's just going to call you and tell you. So now that we're in the age of 3D, all the characters have faces, except they're just kind of potatoes. That's why the voice acting is so important, because they've put a lot of money into the graphics looking good for the environments and the effects and making it feel like a real place. They had to skimp a little on the face textures, which was fine. Face textures never looked good this time period of gaming, so it's better to go for the just sort of like suggestion of a face with the, you know, like the eyeshadow lines, and just let the player's imagination do all the work there. And as a stealth game, Metal Gear Solid is a little bit too in love with its set pieces, which aren't often stealth related, but I get why they wanted to do all these action set pieces, because now they've actually got the 3D models to make them feel big and actiony rather than, you know, having to do them with the little sprites. It's more fun to rappel down a wall in 3D than it is to hang glide with your little sprite just kind of drifting back and forth. Like, it sounds cool, but it's actually a little cooler in 3D. As for the actual gameplay, it's not the best stealth gameplay ever. The levels aren't really... Okay, so this is pretty well known, but the first two areas in the game have a lot of interactable items and weather effects and guards and spotlights and just a lot of stuff for you to sneak around and play with, and that's kind of where most of the game is. Like, there's some bigger areas, but there's just not a lot of big sneaky areas with a lot of interactable sneaky elements. It's a very top-heavy game, and it's worth pointing out that the first two areas are what was in the demo. But it more than makes up for it by just having a really snappy pace and good action set pieces, and, you know, those were all broken up by, like, you know, you get to a big slam of a cutscene where you just talk to someone for like 20 minutes, not something most games would risk doing, and then after that you play for like 10 minutes doing a little bit of stealth, and then there's like an action set piece for another 10 minutes. I don't know, the balance is pretty good when you're actually playing it. It's just really different from other games. The story of Metal Gear Solid is a little reminiscent of the story of Metal Gear 2, but not in like a really explicit way. It's not so much they're trying to draw attention to the fact that it's a sequel, it's more like they knew no one played the last game, so they're gonna reuse their good ideas in the game they hope more people play, and that's fine. The anime terrorists of this one turn out to be led by your secret twin brother! Ooh, Liquid Snake. Dick joke. And this is one of the retcons that happened, is apparently at the end of the last game, Big Boss said to Solid Snake that he was his father. No, he didn't. I just got done playing that game. No, he didn't. But sure, whatever, it's your story. So Liquid Snake is all like upset that he got all like the recessive genes from the experiment to clone the boss that resulted in the two snakes. I don't think that's how recessive genes work, buddy. So he's got like a big inferiority complex. He's trying to recreate the outer heaven that the big boss made. It's just like it's just a mercenary group of soldiers with dreams of being its own nation. That's all it is. Another way the story was really forward-thinking at the time was that it's about real-ass politics, and in a really straightforward way. Like, ignore all of the chuds on the internet who try and pretend these games aren't political. They are super-duper political, and they've got a lot of thoughts about identity and what someone is supposed to do with their life and purposehood. You know, in the trappings of a sort of like high-tech sci-fi Cold War yarn. It's a good darn yarn. So yes, Metal Gear Solid is a goddamn classic and absolutely worth your time to go back to. Control's a little stiff nowadays, but still absolutely a fun time. Not my personal favorite one to play. I know some people who can play this one like 5 times in a row, but that seems more like a result of you having a lot more time as a child. I ain't got time to play this game 5 times. But it actually has like unlockable bonus items depending on how you beat the game. I think that's neat.
Bliskin, I saw someone wearing a cardboard box just now.
A box? I don't know anything about that. You sure you weren't imagining things?
So this is a complicated one to talk about. In order to keep it simple right off the bat, I'm going to talk about the gameplay improvements. It's a lot smoother to play nowadays. The analog control is built in. You can aim your guns in first person mode now, and like headshot guards, there's like directional damage, so if you use like a bullet gun, you can like take out their legs or break their radio so they can't call for support. You can now hold up guards. There's a lot more like densely packed environmental interactables. Like in the early tanker segment, you can shoot a fire extinguisher to expose some lasers. Cool stuff. A lot of great improvements. The stealth is got this hanging thing now, which I never thought the series made like great consistent use of, but it's a nice new tool in your tool belt. And holding up the soldiers gives you like a collectible dog tag if you do it right, so now there's another obsessive thing for people to try and 100% in this game. The main thing I'd say against this game and the controls is that to aim, you lightly press down the square button, and then to shoot, you really strongly push down the square button because the PS2 had analog controls. That's awkward. It is awkward, but it's an awkward control scheme that no other game aside from this and the sequel use that you can absolutely get used to, and it's worth getting used to because the stealth gameplay is just a lot richer and more fulfilling to get good at. But this is where I gotta talk about the story and how it's kind of not possible to experience the story as it was originally intended for you to experience it. So Metal Gear Solid 1 was a huge freaking success, and they immediately started work on the sequel, and it was going to be like an early title for the PS2. People bought Zone of the Enders just to play the demo for this game. They bought a whole ass other game just to get access to the demo. People loved Solid Snake, as they should. He's a really fun character to play as, and they were ready for more. They were so ready for more. And Kojima pulled a fast one. So this game opens with, Solid Snake jumping off a bridge onto a boat, and he's talking with Otacon on the codec. And what he talks about is that he and Otacon have teamed up and are now like destroying Metal Gears across the world, because like the plans for the one in the last game got out, and now everyone's trying to make a Metal Gear robot. So he's going around and destroying him. And like that seems like a great way to continue the story, doesn't it? Like you either give yourself like one big story to stop one big Metal Gear, or you can do a bunch of like disconnected levels and just take down a bunch of littler ones. Like there's a lot of great things you can do with that. And the tanker level is really good. Like there's a boss fight against this Russian lady who's got like who will actually like move a spotlight to blind you in the middle of this gunfight. It's really neat. And there's a lot of guards around, and your main goal is to get down and take some pictures of the Metal Gear robot. And you get down there, you take the pictures, and then suddenly Otacon is back. He's got a new arm. It was cut off by a cyber ninja in the last game. And apparently it's the arm of Liquid Snake, because, well, he died and he's not using it anymore. And Ocelot is apparently possessed by the spirit of Liquid Snake through his arm, and steals the robot, and sinks the tanker, and does he kill Snake? That's the opening sequence. It's a big, flashy, climactic ending first act. And then a weird thing happens, and it's like you're playing the first game again, but with a new character. This is what I mean when I say that it's impossible to go into this story like it was intended. You play most of this game as Raiden, who is a new soldier, and he's off to the Big Shell, which is a cover-up for cleaning up the oil spill from the tanker. Really, it's housing a Metal Gear. And this is his first mission, and he's nothing like Solid Snake, and you're gonna play as him. Have fun! And nothing in the promotional material for this game made it clear that you were gonna be spending time as this guy. He was nowhere to be seen. If anything was leaked about him, it was mostly, there's a segment where you might play as another guy. Don't worry about it, you're still playing as Snake. No, Kojima straight up lied to everyone what this game was mostly about, on purpose to make a point. The point roughly being that after the runaway success of Metal Gear Solid 1, Kojima had a lot of personal doubts about his ability to make a follow-up to that game that would satisfy people, and whether it was even worth giving the fans exactly what they wanted, which was basically more of the first game but shinier. And as a writer, he didn't find that particularly, satisfying. He didn't find it very edifying to just give people more of what they already had. He wanted to build off of that, and he was worried people would reject that. And he took those feelings and turned the whole game into a weird-ass metaphor for feeling like you don't measure up to Solid Snake, who is on this big, cleanup tanker, and he's just like taking guards out and being a way better spy than Raiden is. And this whole time you're playing this game, you just feel like you're player 2 to a player 1 who's running ahead of you and taking care of all the main stuff and giving you like the scraps of gameplay. And Raiden feels like emasculated by this, and he also feels emasculated because his girlfriend is like his main support on the codec, and she's like trying to get him to understand stuff about their relationship in the middle of this mission. It's unpleasant, but in a confrontational way to make the audience question things about themselves. Because Raiden is textually a child soldier raised on VR. He is supposed to be a representation of the players who played the Metal Gear Solid games so much that they feel like they've been raised as soldiers. And all this meta word wanky is like textual, because after a certain point it's revealed that the entire mission on this like big multi-part cleanup facility is actually just a simulated VR mission that's trying to turn Raiden into the perfect soldier to replace Solid Snake. And it's... the fourth wall is just freaking gone. Like, someone inside the simulation inserts a virus that makes the program go crazy, and everything starts to break down. Turns out Colonel Campbell and at least at some point Rose were replaced by a robot pretending to be them, and they start losing control of their program and it's really creepy as all this is like breaking down and Raiden's grip on reality is loosening and the game gets scary at times. Oh, and the president, the ex-president was kidnapped, and it turns out he faked his own kidnapping so he could take over a giant AI pod in this machine to take out the Patriots, or the Sons of Liberty, whatever. The Patriots who secretly control the world government and got him elected, and he's tired of that. Oh, and he's also secretly the third Snake brother. His name is Solidus Snake. It's so weird, and I love it. I didn't play this game when it came out. I played it years later. I knew all the major twists, but they were still absolutely enthralling to go through. Like, it is a fair criticism of this game that the story starts to overpower the gameplay. And that kind of happened in the last game, but it is a much bigger issue in this game because there are like huge segments where you're just listening to this computer yell at you for being a sucky soldier. And I think it was worth it because the ending of this game as a theme of identity for Raiden to realize that even though his experiences were fake and virtual, they still happen to him as far as he's concerned, and that means they're real to him, and his point of view is all that matters there. That's really good. I like that so much. And there's also just crazy stuff, like the big AI machine was designed to control the internet because Kojima had these ideas in his head about what the internet was going to do to information flow and control, and it is scary prescient. It is scary prescient, and the word he uses to represent that is memes. So Metal Gear Solid 2 is basically a unique game. There's nothing else like it in the world because it is very explicitly... It's like if the second Transformers movie decided it was going to ask you why you like Transformers movies and whether that's a good thing for you to enjoy. There's no reason to do that. You're a billion-dollar franchise. Just make people happy. But it's so much more artistically fulfilling to question people and have them think about things. And I really appreciate the hell out of this game for doing that. But the fact that most of the events in Metal Gear Solid 2 were part of a simulation is extremely awkward for any potential sequels. So Metal Gear Solid 3 is a prequel.
Huh? Food.
I plan to cover later in the video what versions of games you should get and what's the easiest way to track them down to play this series, but right here, right now, do not play the original Metal Gear Solid 3 release of this game. You want either the Subsistence re-release or the HD versions, because this version is still using the overhead camera of the last two games, and the level design is no longer playing along. Metal Gear Solid 3 kind of feels like an apology game. It's, well, people weren't so hot on my confrontational twist about the concept of just giving you what you want for a sequel, so I guess for this sequel I'll just give you what you want. But rather than give you another game where you play as Solid Snake, it makes a pretty clever move of going way back in the timeline to have you play as Big Boss, because, well, Snake was cloned from Big Boss, so if you go far enough back in his life, he just looks like Solid Snake and you don't have to change the character model. And going back in time means that this gets to be a 60s Cold War spy drama with its cheesy James Bond intro song, and it's clear that though it's a little under duress to make it just sort of like a fan servicey sequel that gives you all the stuff you wanted, it's clear that they decided to really stretch their wings in other directions. The stealth controls are basically unchanged. The main thing that's different is now you've got like much better like hand-to-hand combat controls. You can throw guys down, grab them, and choke them out and interrogate them. That's good stuff. But there's a lot more interesting layers added on top of that, and the level design is just radically different philosophically. You've now got a camo index that you've got to change your, camouflage clothing to match the jungle setting, even though this is in Russia and there are no jungles in Russia. Now instead of recovering health with rations, you've got a stamina bar that you try and keep full, because when it's full, you heal naturally from damage faster. And since you got to keep an eye on the stamina bar, now you've got a whole food system with all the wildlife in the area, and there's a medical viewer so that damage from enemies and bosses can be specific. It's not just like, oh, you took damage. No, my leg is broken. I gotta splint my arm. I gotta fill in this bullet hole on my side. I gotta salve this burn. That's probably the weakest element added on top. The other new systems are a lot more fun to play with, and even the medical system has its moments. But what really takes this away is that the level design is just so much different. So in the previous games, it was kind of boxy. There's behind the scenes stuff where Kojima plans out his levels using Legos. And this one is, since it's in a jungle, going for a much more naturalistic feel, much more of a linear series of areas to sneak past guards in, and the guards' vision is huge now, actually appropriate vision, which is radically affected by your camo index. Also, the radar is gone. You've got a couple alternate radars, like a sonar ping and a motion detector, but it is not going to show you vision cones, and that's why you really want to play the later releases of this game, because the top-down camera is just not going to show you guards off in the distance who can see you. Later versions had not a great camera that follows you behind in third person, but it gets the job done and you can see in front of you for the first time. Huge improvement. And story-wise, since you've gone all the way back in time to play as Big Boss, now you get to learn about his mentor, the Boss. He's not called Big Boss at this time, he's just called Naked Snake. Dick jokes. You're on a mission to track down sort of an early Metal Gear prototype in Russia, and it turns out the boss betrays you really early on in the mission and gives this electro-powered Vulcan guy. He just has lightning powers, don't question it. So after that first mission goes tits up, you get sent back in to kill the boss and disable the big bad robot. And you run into this other spy named Eva, who's got her tits out for a lot of the game, because she is explicitly trying to seduce Snake to distract him from her nefarious spy ways. It's fun. See, Metal Gear Solid 2 was doing some really interesting things on a larger thematic narrative level, but Metal Gear Solid 3 brings back the banter of the radio. And it's got much better bosses. The Cobra unit have not as much personality as the guys from Metal Gear Solid 1, but they make up for it by being way better to fight. The guy who shoots bees out of his mouth is silly. The Fear, who leaps through trees and you can leave behind rotten fruit that he'll eat and get sick so you can shoot him. The sniper battle with the End is just straight up one of the best boss fights in gaming history. And all the little details that these games have always loved to cram into their games, all the little unique interactions have basically taken over the game. This game is almost entirely constructed of neat edge cases designed to make it feel more real and lived in. Like, you can capture a snake using your tranq pistol, throw it at a guard, and there's a unique animation if you hit him with the cage for the snake, like, wrestling with him. It's great! This is widely considered to be the storytelling peak of the series, and yeah, I can't really front it. It is. The radio chatter with Paramedic and Sigint and Major Zero as your operators are great. Paramedic likes to talk about like old Godzilla movies. I'm all in for that. And Sigint can't even begin to comprehend why Naked Snake thinks hiding in a cardboard box is a great idea. Major Zero is obsessed with James Bond movies, which is so subtle in this game that's just directly ripping off the way the James Bond movies did their title sequences. There's just a lot to love in this game. It is overflowing with charm, and the gameplay is finally here to support it. There's almost no backtracking, there's almost no fat on this game. There's like a whole extra area you don't even have to go to, which has like 5 entrances in to get like a special like machine gun early. It's great! And maybe not the best place to start because it is very like systems heavy, but once you're in to this series, you must put this one on your list. On Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, but I don't have the box to hold up like the other ones because even though I played this game, the moment I finished it, I sold it back to GameStop because I was never going to play it again. Metal Gear Solid 4 is, I don't want to say the nadir because there's some improvements going on here. It's not all bad, but it's just not kicking like it should. The problems immediately start when we're actually continuing the story timeline-wise for Metal Gear Solid 2. That was not a good idea. I have no idea what events of Metal Gear Solid 2 were actually real and count in this story, but Raiden's back and he's a cyborg ninja now. Snake is old now, yeah, because there's a pretty hard to miss theme about being too tired and old for this shit, but you gotta keep going because the world needs you. Kind of like this franchise at this point. Like, I can't, it's hard to tell at this point that Kojima and his team were getting a little done with it. The gameplay is good. It's not as wild and inventive as in Metal Gear Solid 3, but it is trying some neat ideas. It's trying to create stealth through active war zones. Like, you know, this is post 9/11 in the cultural consciousness, so a lot of events in this game kind of happen in sort of like Middle Eastern nations where, you know, the private military corporations are taking on the local rebels, and you're not really here for either of them, but, you know, maybe if you sneak your way past the rebels, you can blow up some of the PMC's tanks and help out the rebels, or you can shoot all the rebels and the PMCs will move down the road and you can just, you know, get past their little encampment. You know, there's some neat ideas in that. The shooting controls are a lot better. The third-person camera is improved from the Subsistence re-release. It's still not great in comparison to like a more modern 3D camera. This game's actually a lot older than you think. It was a very early PlayStation 3 title. There's a neat new thing with the camo where you can press up against a wall and your like bodysuit will take on the texture of the wall. That's a lot better than going into a menu. It does mean you can make him look really silly though, and Old Man Snake already looks silly with his grizzled face and his really tight buttocks in this muscle suit that he's wearing, and you're going to be looking at that buttocks a lot, especially since there's this new like shuffle mechanic where like you lay prone on the ground and you just sort of like flex your way across and like waves his butt right in front of the camera. It's not subtle. In other news that isn't subtle, Eva in the last game was sexy, but like in context of the narrative, she was doing it on purpose to accomplish her goals. Whereas in this game, the new pack of anime terrorists are a bunch of models in skin-tight uniforms with like robot tentacles coming out of them. And when you destroy the robot parts, they sort of like flail around on the ground in their skin-tight uniform. This is all mo-capped. It's awkward. It kind of sucks because the boss fights for like, some of them are good. Actually, 3 out of 4 of them are good. The flying one can piss off. It's not even hard since now you've got proper like gun aiming. But like the sneaky octopus one that blends in with the environment is funny. And the sniper robot wolf is blatantly a callback but fun. And the psychic one is again blatantly a callback to Psycho Mantis but fun. Like fun boss fights mechanically. Just kind of a shame they've got nothing going on story-wise. And that story is a bit of a stinker. I'm not even going to pretend that I can sum it all up because it is trying to pull together all the canon of the last 5 games, plus maybe some mobile spin-offs that technically count. I haven't really been going into a lot of detail with this story because it is a sprawling disaster of a franchise in terms of like explaining events. And I just don't want to go down that road, and this game is almost entirely explaining events, and it's a real problem. Yeah, Snake and Otacon are tracking down Ocelot, who's still pretending that he's possessed by liquid. Yeah, spoilers, he's pretending to do that to fool the Patriots, who are dead anyway, and are just been like, their AI robots have just been running everything on autopilot since they're dead now. And I'd say the big sin of this game is that very little of it is standing on its own. There's the new guy Drebin who hooks you up with guns, and there's the 4 ladies who are at least have backstories, kind of just dumped on your head by Drebin after you beat them, but that's kind of it for new stuff. Everything else is trying to make it Every other major plot point is trying to make itself seem and feel meaningful by directly, explicitly tying itself into a thing that already happened. Now, sometimes that works because it's explaining a thing maybe you had questions about, maybe it brings in a character you missed. Mei Ling shows up, she's piloting a battleship, not where I thought they'd take her character, but cool. But then it happens in dumb ways, like Vamp is back, and it turns out he's unkillable as a vampire because of nanomachines that were given to him by the doctor from Metal Gear Solid, whose name I can't remember. Why would I care about that? They never spoke to each other. He wasn't even invented in Metal Gear Solid 1. This is just tying together 2 things that I already theoretically know and care about together to make me care about them more, and it doesn't work. What does work about this story? The idea that war has just become like this overriding business where like all economies are just geared towards creating weapons so the PMCs can go into the world and fight with this big unified system that tracks everything. Neat in a sci-fi way. It's called Guns of the Patriots because his main goal is to disable everyone's access to the weapons because the weapons won't turn on if they don't recognize who's holding them from the nanomachines, and that's a neat idea. That's why Drebin is around as a character, to hook you up with weapons that are unlocked, but like, I don't know, like, I was picking up guns off those like rebel soldiers, like just a basic AK-47. The daughter of that boss Olga in Metal Gear Solid 2, she was pregnant. She gave birth at some point and her daughter was stolen by the Patriots. Well, turns out Otacon and Snake rescued her and have been raising her in their little like airplane clubhouse, and she's like 10 and cute, and they're like her gay dads, and she's always cooking eggs for them, and she's also like a master computer hacker. It's cute. It's actually cute watching Otacon and Snake try and co-parent this child. Neither of them are any good at this, but it's cute. Snake being old and just trying to like leave behind a legacy of meaning for his life, not necessarily in his actions, but in like, he's trying to convey to people what his like personal philosophy was before he kicks it. He's dying early because he's a clone. That's all the explanation you're getting. Yeah, he's like visibly really done with this shit, and you know, that's like a good character type to have. I don't know if I wanted it for Snake, but whatever, it's fine, and David Hayter does it well. Raiden gets to do some really cool action scenes. Doesn't really, you know, save the day or anything, but it was very cool to see him kicking ass. We'll come back to that. The third level has this neat segment that's actually kind of 1950s French noir. New flavor of stealth for the series, I'll give it that. Kind of a long level, though. I'm really struggling to come up with nice things to say about this game because it was very unpleasant to play. There's 5 acts, and I don't know why, but you have to install like for 10 minutes to play the next act, and there's like 30 minutes of cutscenes to start an act and 30 minutes of cutscenes to end an act, and when you're going from Act 1 to Act 2, that's like an hour of cutscenes to get to the next actual gameplay. And like I said, the actual story's just not that good. Is Metal Gear Solid 4 worth experiencing? I don't necessarily regret having played it because it definitely ties into a franchise that I love, and it's got a lot of characters that I still care about, and it's not completely shitting the bed. But it's a mess. And it's not a mess that I ever care to experience again, and the gameplay wasn't strong enough to carry it, I'm sorry. I guess the end word is that if you're committed to enjoying this franchise, it's not gonna ruin your day to play this, but it's also not gonna ruin your life if you miss it. Like, you can just look up someone's video explaining the story and be good with that. So I probably should have seen this coming after I filmed for 2 hours just getting raw footage for this video, but this is too long for one video. It's too much. I'm gonna split it up. See you in part 2.